So in this video, I just want to show you my complete process for color correcting and color grading my D-Log-M footage. And this is whether I shoot with the Osmo Action 4 or the Osmo Pocket 3. It's going to work either way. And there are two ways that I kind of go about the whole conversion process, because when you shoot in D-Log-M, it's a flat color profile, so you have to convert it into a normal color space. And so I tend to do this manually, or I will use a conversion, and I have some of those, but I'll show you those later. But if I'm doing a video where my lighting hasn't really changed, or I have a lot more time to edit the video, then I do tend to do it manually, because you do have more control rather than just putting a LUT on it, even though the LUTs work really well, but it just means that you can really fine tune certain things. So the first method that I'll show you is doing it manually, and this doesn't matter what editing software you use. I'm just using Final Cut Pro because that's what I use, but you can use this in any editing software. So I have got two clips on my timeline. This first one is from the Osmo Action 4, and then this one is from the Osmo Pocket 3. So the first thing that I do is convert the footage from flat to a normal color space, and I'm going to grab my color adjustments for this. And what you really want to be doing is adjusting the blacks and the whites and the highlights and the shadows, and this is what's going to give you the contrast and bring that contrast back into the footage, as well as adding saturation. So what you also want to have up is the video scopes. So I'm not going to go into all the other scopes. This is the main one that I use, just so that I can see if my blacks are clipping or if my highlights are also clipping. So you know that your blacks are going to be basically crushed if they go below 0, and you know that your highlights are going to be clipped if they go above 100. So you just want to make sure that you're keeping the waveform between the 0 and the 100 mark. There's more to it, but just in very simple terms, that is the best way to make sure that the footage is looking as best as it can. The first thing I'm going to look at are my black points, so I'm going to bring that down. You can see it's starting to add a bit more contrast in there, and then I'm also going to look at my highlights. With the highlights as well, like I said, you can go as far as you can go before you go above the 100 mark, but you also just want to be looking at your footage as well to make sure that certain parts that have the highlights aren't overexposed to your eye, but using the scopes is going to help massively. So I'm just going to take that up a little bit, and then I'm also going to put some shadows back in, and I might also just pull up my whites a bit, or the brightness rather, just to make the footage look a little bit brighter. And then this is literally a case of you kind of going between and going back and forth. So let me just show you before. So this is the flat footage, and this is with the sort of contrast added in. So before and after, before and after. So the footage still looks kind of washed out because there's no saturation that's been added. All you have to do is just pull up the saturation slider. You can do that. And then the next thing is just adjusting the color temperature. So if your footage looks warmer or it looks cooler, then you can just adjust it the other way, and same with the tint. So if it looks a little bit magenta or it looks a little bit green, then you can adjust the tint as well. And for that, I tend to go to my color wheels, and then you've got the temperature slider here. So if you wanted to make it a little bit on the blue side, or you wanted to make it warmer, then you can do that. But I think that looks okay. The other way to do this more accurately, and it's another step whilst you're filming, which doesn't necessarily take more time, but it's just an extra thing that you need to do if you're bothered, is use a color checker. And I talked about this in a different video about color grading, so it's worth looking at that video, and I'll link to it. But if you use a color checker and you hold it up in your scene, then you can use it in this process to make sure that your white balance is correct to how you saw it on the day. But I feel like that's getting really deep. I just want to do this on a really kind of simple surface level. Your white balance, if you watched the previous video and you either shot in auto white balance or you shot using the little trick that I showed you, then your white balance is pretty much going to be spot on anyway, so I don't think you need to necessarily worry about that. So the next thing, okay, so that was the Action 4 footage. I'm actually just going to copy those settings across to this Pocket 3 footage. And I might need to adjust a couple of things. No, that actually looks really good. It works perfectly. What I might do though is maybe bring the highlights down. So let me just go back to my color adjustments and pull the highlight back a little bit. And I might just put a bit more into the blacks. You can see it's kind of touching here. So this portion of the screen of the waveform, that's me. And so this part here is my scarf. And this part here is my face, and then up here we're getting to the sky where it's touching. So this line here that's touching the 100 line is actually the sky in the background, which is a little bit clipped, but I'm not so bothered about that. It doesn't matter because I look properly lit and I'm not overexposed or anything. So that actually looks really good. And I could literally just leave it there and it looks really nice. I might add a bit more saturation here to me. Not sure that made much of a difference. It did make a difference. And then the next thing, so like I said, you could completely leave the footage as it is like that now, but this is where I then use Film Convert Nitrate to just make the footage look a little bit more film-like. And in my previous video, I mentioned that there isn't a specific camera profile for Film Convert Nitrate. And if you don't know what that is, it's basically a film emulation suite and you can just get that filmic look with your footage. But there are dedicated camera profiles for the different cameras that you have because it matches to those, to the camera sensor and that kind of thing. But like I said, there isn't a dedicated one for the Pocket 3 or the Action 4, but there is a default setting that I tend to use, and that kind of gives me a nice look anyway without needing to necessarily have a dedicated profile. It would be nice if there was one, but there isn't, but this works. So if you do have Film Convert or you don't have it, you can download it as a trial and try it out, and then you can see how it looks for you. So I'm going to drag it onto my footage and you can see it's already like changed the look of the footage, but I'm not just going to leave it like that because you do have to do a little bit of tweaking to the settings. So if there was a camera profile, this is where you'd actually change it over to the DJI Pocket 3 or the Osmo Action 4, but there isn't, so I just leave it on this default setting. I'm sure if I went through the different camera profiles, I'd probably be able to find something which was a close match to this profile, but I'm quite happy to just leave it on default for now because I just want the film grain and the little bit of that film emulation that you get from the stock. So from here, I go through and the first thing I change is I just turn the grain strength down a little bit. And then the main thing that you want to be looking at is this film settings tab. And the saturation, so you can make it more saturated here. This vibrance setting adds vibrance in a specific tone. So it's kind of got like a greeny tone. It's bringing up the vibrance of the film stock. And this film stock has, I guess, a kind of a green tone to it. So you can play around with that. These are the different film stocks as well. I forgot to say these are the different film stocks, so you can go through and choose those. I'm just going to leave it on this one for now. And then this is the actual, the intensity of the film. So this is with the film stock off, basically. It's at 4, now it's at 0, so that's basically with it off. And then pulling it up all the way. This is basically with it fully on. So it's just about tweaking it. And the film loomer is also like the contrast of the film stock as well. So you're just going to go through and just tweak it as you like. And then you can also use these color wheels so that you can add more blue to the midtones if you want, or red, or any color that you want to the midtones. Same with the highlights and the shadows. If you want to just take the highlights down a little bit if you think it's a bit too much, or same with the midtones, you can take them up or you can take them down. Same with the shadows. So in this part of the shadows, you can actually lift the shadows so it has more of a faded look, but not like faded in the sense that the footage is washed out. But you just literally can just go through and you can tweak things, and it's so easy because all you're doing is tweaking things to look how you want it to look. So this isn't necessarily the best way or the way that you have to do it. This is just my way, and this is just how I like to get my footage to a point where you see it in my videos. And so this is just the process that I go through. So this, let me just show you, this is the footage without Film Convert Nitrate on, and then this is the footage with Film Convert Nitrate on. It just gives it a little bit extra, it just looks a bit different, you know? And if I do the same for the Action 4 footage, I'm just going to copy it over, and then I can tweak from there. I already have that, so paste that. The other thing that I said, so you can see here that you can see there's kind of like a red glow around the highlights. That's because Film Convert now has a halation setting. I'm actually just gonna desaturate the glow because the halation adds like a halo around your highlights and the brightest parts in the footage. And you can kind of use this as a way to apply a mist filter effect, because if you desaturate that halo, that glow, then it's just white and it gives you that mist-like effect that you get from a mist filter. So if you don't have your mist filter for the Pocket 3 yet, then using halation is a really good way to try and kind of mimic that and emulate that. So that works really well. And in this footage, you can see here in the tree, you've got that halo effect. So if I turn it down, you can see that that glow's kind of gone in the tree here. So just going back to this clip, this is before Film Convert and this is after Film Convert. And the other thing is with color grading is that if you do this, it gives your footage a consistent look across all your clips. So if you shot with two different cameras, so if I shot, for example, with the Pocket 3 and the Action 4, which I tend to do, then I can get that consistent look across all of the clips because I've color graded them all to be exactly the same. So that's my very simple process. And you can see it literally took me like minutes to do that, even just going from the conversion part. So I will put a link to Film Convert Nitrate in the description. Like I said, there's not a dedicated profile for the Pocket 3 or the Action 4, but you can kind of get around it. And because I already have it, it just made sense for me to try it out. And you can, like I said, download the trial and see if it's worth it to you to do it that way without having a dedicated profile. But yeah, that's totally your call. I did say I was going to show you what it was, how to use it with the LUTs. So let me just duplicate this clip and get rid of these effects. So if you wanted to apply a LUT, so like I said, if I was doing things really quickly and I didn't want to tweak each clip individually, then I would just drop a LUT on there. And I created some conversion LUTs, and I'll show you. Let's go with this one. So you can drop it on, you can see it's converted it really quickly. And there are three different strengths. The reason that I created three different strengths is because if you're just trying to do things really quickly and you don't necessarily have time to tweak things and tweak the different black levels and the shadows and the highlights and the brightness and that you can kind of get as close to it as possible by choosing one of these variations. So there's a light one here. So if you just wanted a light look, this is before, this is after, I'd say that's too light for that clip. So I would probably go with either the MIDI one, which works quite well. So this is before, this is after, or the heavy one, which might be a bit too much. Yeah, there's a little bit too much, but then I could just come in and just reduce it a little bit. So that is the conversion LUT. And then even with the conversion LUT, you could still add your color grade on top of that as well. So that is it. That is my process. And it took me longer to show you guys how to do it, but it's literally minutes when I do this. It doesn't take me a long time to color grade and color correct my footage. And like I said, this is a pro art form. There are people that do this specifically as their job. But for me, I'm just trying to get a dedicated look as quickly and as simply as possible, and that is the process that I go through. So hopefully you found it useful. If you haven't seen the previous video where I talk about the camera settings and the best settings to shoot that I find in D-Log-M so that you don't have to tweak your footage so much in terms of color correcting it, then that video is definitely worth checking out, and I'll put a link in the description to it, and I'll also link it at the end of this video. But thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys later.